I had rehearsed the moment so many times that when it finally arrived, my hands were completely steady. 14 months of waiting, and all I felt was a strange, crystalline calm as I opened my laptop and said, "Before we vote on anything, I want to show everyone something." My sister Daniela looked up from across the boardroom table. Her boyfriend, our newly appointed CFO, straightened his tie, and I pressed play on the forensic audit file, and the room stopped breathing. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. I would love to know what city you are watching from. Drop it in the comments because this story is going to need witnesses, and honestly, I need to know people heard this. My name is Renata Carvalho Mays, and I am 38 years old, and 14 months ago I discovered that my younger sister had been systematically draining our family business of $567,000 while I was recovering from spinal surgery. She did not do it all at once. She did not do it clumsily. She did it methodically, transfer by transfer, reimbursement by reimbursement, vendor payment by vendor payment, and she had the audacity to promote her boyfriend to chief financial officer while my back was literally in a brace. Some people in my family still think I went too far when the moment finally came. After everything you are about to hear, I genuinely want to know what you think. Because I am not entirely sure myself, but I am certain I did what needed to be done. To understand why that boardroom morning mattered so much, I have to take you back to the beginning. Not my childhood, I am not going to bore you with that, but back to the company and back to what it was, and back to what it meant to every single person whose last name is Carvalho. My father, Eduardo Carvalho, built Carvalho Distribution from a warehouse with 2 forklifts and a van. He spent 22 years turning it into a mid-size regional distributor of specialty food products, olive oils, imported grains, artisan preserves, the kind of goods that were starting to show up in high-end grocery chains and boutique delis around the mid-Atlantic. By the time I was 24 and joined the company as a junior logistics coordinator, it was bringing in roughly $4.2 million in annual revenue. Not enormous, but solid, real, built by hand. My father used to say that every pallet in that warehouse had his fingerprints on it, and he was not wrong. I worked my way up over 8 years. By the time I was 32, I was director of operations. I oversaw procurement, fulfillment, warehouse staffing, and carrier relationships. I negotiated our 3 largest distribution contracts. I implemented a routing system that cut our fuel overhead by 19% in 1 fiscal year. I'm not telling you this to brag. I'm telling you this because what happened next only makes sense if you understand that I was not decorative in that company. I was load-bearing. My sister Daniela Carvalho was 5 years younger than me and had joined the company 4 years after I did. Her title was Client Relations Manager, which in practice meant she handled new account onboarding, attended trade shows, and maintained relationships with our top 20 retail clients. She was good at it, genuinely good. Daniela has a warmth that I have never been able to manufacture. People liked her immediately, trusted her fast, and told her things they should probably have held back. In a sales-adjacent role, that is an extraordinary asset. I respected it, even when it irritated me. The dynamic between us inside the company was never simple, partly because the dynamic between us inside our family was never simple. Our parents loved us both, but they loved us differently. Our mother, Vera Carvalho, had always had a particular tenderness for Daniela that she did not quite manage to extend to me, not out of cruelty, I think, but out of recognition. I was like our father, direct, numbers-oriented, not especially warm in rooms full of people. Daniela was like our mother, socially effortless, emotionally expressive, the daughter who called every Sunday without being reminded. I do not resent this. I made peace with it a long time ago. But I want you to understand the architecture of our family, because that architecture is how Daniela believed she could get away with what she did. Our father had a mild stroke in February of 2021. He recovered well, his speech and mobility were unaffected, but his cardiologist told him in clear terms that sustained executive stress was genuinely dangerous for him going forward. My father was 63 years old and had worked harder than any person I have ever known. The stroke scared him. It scared all of us. By that summer, he had begun the process of transitioning out of day-to-day management and setting up the company's governance for the next generation. He divided ownership equally, 33.5% to me, 33.5% to Daniela, and 33% retained by him in a structured trust, the terms of which I understood but will not detail here because it is not relevant yet. The board was restructured to include our father as chairman emeritus, a position that was largely ceremonial, me as chief operating officer, Daniela in her existing role but elevated to vice president of client development, and 2 outside board members, a retired food industry executive named Harold Osai and a financial consultant named Priya Nambudiri, whose function was to provide oversight and protect against exactly the kind of family dysfunction that tends to destroy second-generation businesses. On paper, it was clean. Thoughtfully designed, my father had even hired a governance consultant to help draft the new shareholder agreement, which included conflict of interest provisions, expense approval thresholds, and hiring protocols for senior roles. I remember reading those provisions and thinking, good, we are protected. I was wrong, of course, but I did not know that yet. The first sign was small enough that I almost missed it. It was November of 2021, and we were in our weekly operations meeting when Daniela mentioned, almost in passing, that she had been in preliminary conversations with a man named Sergio Vidal about a possible consulting role. Sergio was Daniela's boyfriend of about 2 years at that point. He had a background in finance. He had worked at 2 smaller private equity firms and before that at a regional bank, but he had been freelancing for the past 18 months, which in my reading meant his trajectory had stalled somewhere. I asked what kind of consulting. Daniela said financial process optimization. I asked why we would need external financial consulting when we had a perfectly functional accounting team and a CFO, a woman named Linda Bro who had been with the company for 11 years and was one of the sharpest people in the building. Daniela said Linda was focused on compliance and reporting, and that Sergio could bring a fresh operational lens. She said it lightly, like it was a minor administrative matter, and then she moved on to the next agenda item before I had finished forming my next question. I let it go that day, but I made a note. 2 weeks later, I asked Linda Bro directly whether anyone had approached her about supplementing her team. Linda looked at me with a careful expression, the look of someone choosing words precisely, and said no one had spoken to her formally, but that she had heard Sergio's name mentioned in a conversation between Daniela and our father. I asked what the conversation had been about. Linda said she had not heard the full context, but that the word modernization had come up more than once. That evening I went home to my apartment in Baltimore and sat with a glass of wine and thought about the word modernization and what it might be a prelude to. And then I told myself I was being paranoid and went to bed. If you have ever been counted out by someone who should have known better, you know exactly what that particular silence feels like, the one where you are not sure yet whether to trust your instincts or dismiss them. I know it too well. By January of 2022, I was in the early stages of what my surgeon would later call a significant lumbar disc herniation at 2 levels. The pain had been building since the previous spring. I had been managing it with physical therapy and the particular stubbornness of a person who does not want to be inconvenienced by her own body. In late January, I woke up one morning and could not put weight on my left leg. 3 days later, I was in surgery. The recovery was 6 to 8 weeks of limited mobility, followed by another 6 weeks of restricted activity. I was not in the office. I was working from home in a limited capacity, handling email and calls, but I was not in the building, not in meetings, not physically present. I told Daniela before my surgery date. I told her what she would need to cover, who to coordinate with on the logistics side, and that I would be available by phone for anything that could not wait. I remember she hugged me in the parking lot of the office building and said, "Just rest, I have this." Her eyes were warm. Her arms were tight around my shoulders. I believed her. That is the part that still sits in me like something lodged. She did have it. She had all of it. And she used every day of my absence to restructure what she could and hide what she couldn't. The first thing I found out about when I came back, not the worst thing, but the first, was Sergio. It was mid-April of 2022. I had returned to the office 3 days earlier, still moving carefully, still taking the elevator instead of the stairs, still not back to full hours. My assistant, a sharp and quietly observant young man named Quay Massant, set a stack of signed contracts on my desk on my second morning back and left without comment. I flipped through them out of habit. Near the bottom of the stack was a consulting agreement, signed by Daniela in her capacity as VP, executed during my leave, retaining one Sergio Vidal as a financial operations consultant at a rate of $9,500 per month, for an initial term of 12 months with automatic renewal unless canceled with 60 days written notice. $9,500 a month, $114,000 annually if renewed. For a man whose last salaried position had ended 18 months before he was retained, I sat there for a long time. Then I picked up the agreement and walked it to Linda Broa's office and put it on her desk and watched her face. Linda looked at the contract, then she looked at me. Her expression did not change, which told me more than any expression could have. "Did you know about this?" I kept my voice level. "Not officially," she paused. "I was made aware he had been given a workspace and access credentials while you were out." Access credentials to what? The accounting platform. Read-only access was what I was told. And do you believe it was read-only? Linda did not answer that question. She picked up her pen and put it down again. "I think," she said carefully, "that there may be some things worth looking at." That was the first day I understood the shape of what had been built while I was gone. I did not confront Daniela that day. I did not call my father. I went back to my office, closed the door, and opened a new folder on my desktop that I labeled simply April Review. And then I started reading. What What I found in the first week was enough to make me cold all the way through. Sergio had not had read-only access. He had been given edit permissions to 3 accounts: vendor payments, reimbursements, and what the platform labeled operational contingency, a discretionary account that my father and I had set up for unexpected supply chain costs. The contingency account had a maximum balance of $120,000 and was intended to be replenished quarterly from operations. Between February and April of 2022, while I was out, the contingency account had been drawn down by $63,000. The vendor payments account showed 12 new vendor entries I did not recognize, added in February and March, all of them paid out between $1,500 and $4,000 each. The reimbursements account showed 31 new entries over 10 weeks. I printed everything. I organized it by date. I did not say a word. I want to be very clear about something. I did not know yet how bad it was. I thought I was looking at maybe $60,000, $70,000 in questionable transactions. I thought it was possible. I allowed myself to believe it was possible, that there was an explanation. New vendors I wasn't aware of, legitimate expenses that hadn't been routed through the right approval channel. Finance consultants do sometimes create new vendor relationships. It was possible. I decided to give the situation exactly 2 weeks to reveal itself before I escalated anything. I would watch, I would document, and I would wait for the picture to become clear. The picture became clear much faster than 2 weeks. It was a Thursday afternoon in late April, the 28th to be exact, when Daniela stopped by my office door around 4 in the afternoon. She was in a good mood, the particular bright-eyed mood she gets when something has gone her way. She told me one of our largest retail clients had renewed their annual contract, and that Sergio had helped her put together a revised pricing structure that the client had responded well to. She was clearly inviting me to be pleased. I smiled and said that was great news. I asked her to send me the new pricing terms when she had a moment. She said she would. Then she looked at me with something that was almost consideration, just for a second, and said, "He's really good, Renata. I think you're going to be glad he's here." "I'm sure I will be," I said. She left. I waited until I heard the elevator, and then I called Linda Bro and asked her to come to my office and close the door. I showed Linda what I had found, not all of it, just the contingency account withdrawals and the unrecognized vendor entries. I watched her go through the printouts slowly, page by page. She did not make a sound. When she finished, she aligned the pages precisely, handed them back to me, and said, "I need to pull the full payment records for those vendor IDs before I can tell you what I think you have here. Can you give me 48 hours? You have 48 hours. She stood up to leave, then stopped. "Renata, when you get what I'm going to bring you, be careful about who you tell first." I nodded. I understood her completely. Linda came back to me in 36 hours, not 48, which told me she had found something worth hurrying over. She brought a folder. She sat down across from me and put the folder on my desk and said, without preamble, "The 12 new vendors are all single-entity LLCs. I traced the business addresses on 3 of them. 2 are the same address, a mailbox rental in Towson. The third one is a residential address in Silver Spring." Silver Spring was where Sergio Vittle lived. I looked at Linda for a long moment. "Do you know whose address in Silver Spring?" I looked up the property records. She held my gaze. "It's registered to a Marta Vittle. That's his mother's name." I found her in his LinkedIn connections. I had to put my hands flat on the desk to stop them from doing anything visible. "How much has gone to these vendors total?" Linda opened the folder. "From what I can see in the period you were out, February through mid-April, roughly $104,000 in vendor payments to the 12 accounts. I cannot confirm yet whether any of the other payments in the reimbursements account are connected. That will take more time." $104,000 in 10 weeks, through shell vendors, 2 of which used the same mailbox rental address and 1 of which used the home address of Sergio Vittle's mother. I sat very still for a while, then I said, "Linda, I need you to understand something. What you have just told me does not leave this office. Not yet. I am not going to react to this today or this week. I need you to keep pulling records, and I need you to do it quietly, and I need to know everything before I move." Linda looked at me steadily. "Understood." She picked up the folder, then set it back down. "There is one more thing." Of course there was. I heard from our HR coordinator that there is a proposal on the table to restructure the finance team, specifically to create a CFO title and elevation for the role currently held by whoever leads the finance function. Linda. "That's you, that's me." Her voice was even. "But the proposal, as I understand it, does not have my name in it." I felt something cold and very focused settle in the center of my chest. "When did you hear about this?" "Last week, from the HR coordinator informally. She thought I should know." I thanked Linda. I waited until she had closed the door, and then I opened a second folder on my desktop and labeled it April Review Phase 2. And I began to understand that what I was dealing with was not a side arrangement or a freelance opportunity gone sideways. What I was dealing with was a systematic plan to move Sergio Vittle into a position of structural control over our company's financial function, with the apparent cooperation of my sister and the apparent ignorance of my father, and with $104,000 already moved through an architecture of shell vendors before I had even put on a pair of shoes without wincing. That was just the beginning. The CFO proposal appeared on an official agenda in May of 2022. I found out about it the way I found out about a lot of things during this period, not because anyone told me directly, but because Quay Massant had a talent for leaving documents in my inbox without editorial commentary. He was my assistant. His job was to make sure I had information. He did his job extremely well, and I have never properly thanked him for it. The proposal was 3 pages. It outlined a restructuring of the financial leadership of Carvalho Distribution to include a newly created Chief Financial Officer position, reporting directly to the CEO, my father, and to the board. It noted that the company had experienced significant financial complexity growth in the prior fiscal year and that the existing accounting team leadership was better suited to compliance and audit functions than to strategic financial direction. It did not name Linda Bro by name. It did not have to. The recommended candidate for the CFO role was Sergio Vittle. The proposal cited his background in private equity and banking, his demonstrated alignment with company culture, and his 6 months of embedded operational experience at Carvalho Distribution. 6 months of embedded operational experience. He had been a contractor for 6 months, during which time approximately $104,000 in company funds had moved through vendors bearing his mother's home address. And now he was being proposed for the role that would give him signature authority over the company's financial accounts. I read the proposal twice. Then I read it a third time more slowly. I needed to know who had authored it. There was no author listed on the document itself, which was interesting. I looked at the document properties in the digital version. The file had been created in a user profile registered to Daniela Carvalho Mays. My sister had written it herself. I saved the document properties screenshot to my April review folder, which was growing. Then I went to the board meeting where the proposal was on the agenda, and I did something I had not done in a long time. I played dumb. The board meeting was in early May of 2022 on a Tuesday morning. It was a relatively small table, my father, Daniela, me, Harold Osai, and Priya Nambudiri as the outside members, and the company's attorney, a man named Thomas Farrell who had handled Carvalho Distribution's legal matters for 9 years and who I trusted in the particular way you trust someone who is competent but not personally loyal to you. Daniela presented the CFO proposal herself. She was composed and well-prepared, she had done her homework, and the presentation was polished. She talked about the company's growth trajectory, the increasing complexity of our vendor relationships, the need for strategic financial leadership at the executive level. She talked about Sergio's qualifications with the warmth of someone who believes in what she's saying because she did believe in it. Whatever else was true about what Daniela was doing, I do not think she experienced it as wrong. That is the part that is hardest to explain to people. Harold Oss asked about the process for identifying and evaluating the candidate. Daniela said the proposal had grown out of an informal assessment during Sergio's consulting engagement, which had demonstrated his capabilities in a live environment. Priya Nambudiri asked whether there had been any external search or competitive process. Daniela said that given Sergio's embedded knowledge of the company, it had seemed more efficient to evaluate from within. I asked one question, just one. I asked whether Linda Bro had been consulted on the restructuring and what her response had been. There was a brief silence. Daniela said Linda had been made aware of the proposal. Made aware, I said, not consulted. The distinction is semantic, Daniela said. I don't think it is, I said, and then I said nothing else. The vote was 3-2 in favor of proceeding to a formal evaluation process. My father voted in favor. Harold Osai voted in favor. Daniela voted in favor. Priya Nambudiri voted against. I voted against. My father looked at me after the vote with an expression I had seen before, the look of a man who hopes his daughters will work things out between themselves. He said, Renata, I think we should give this process a fair chance. His voice was gentle, which made it worse. Of course, I said, I just want to make sure the process is thorough. I smiled at my father. I smiled at Harold Osai. I did not smile at Daniela. After the meeting, I drove directly to the office of my attorney. Not Thomas Farrell, my personal attorney, a woman named Catherine Stone who specialized in business litigation and corporate governance and who had represented me in a contract dispute 2 years earlier. I had kept her number. I was glad I had. I walked into Catherine's office, sat down, and put the April review folder on her desk. Catherine Stone was 51 years old, with the particular unhurried quality of someone who has seen most varieties of human betrayal and is no longer surprised by any of them. She opened the folder. She read slowly. She asked 3 questions as she read, clarifying questions, practical ones, and I answered them. When she was done, she sat back in her chair and looked at me. How long have you been sitting on this? About 3 weeks. Did you touch anything, move any documents? Change any access permissions? No. Did you tell anyone outside your accounting team lead? No. Good. She folded her hands. I want to bring in a forensic accountant, someone who is not connected to your company's existing audit relationships. I want a full independent review of every transaction that occurred during your leave of absence, and I want the scope to extend back 6 months before your surgery date, because if this was planned, it started before you went under. I had not thought to go back before my surgery. The moment she said it, I understood she was right. How long will that take, depending on record volume and cooperation? 4 to 6 weeks for a preliminary report, 2 to 3 months for anything comprehensive. Can we do it without triggering any internal alerts, without Sergio or Daniela knowing the review is underway? Catherine tilted her head slightly. That depends on how the records are accessed. If you authorize it in your capacity as COO, the retrieval is routine, no flags. Then I authorize it. She picked up a pen. One more thing, you said the board voted 3 to 2 to proceed with the CFO evaluation. That evaluation process is your window. As long as that process is ongoing, no appointment can be finalized without another board vote. You need to make that process last. I understood her meaning exactly. How long can I reasonably extend it? A legitimate evaluation process for a C-suite role at a company your size? 3 months minimum, 6 months with any rigor. Request an external search, request competency assessments, request reference checks. Every legitimate step buys time. That was when I understood what the next phase looked like. It did not look like confrontation, it looked like procedure. I was going to make the process so thorough, so clean, so textbook compliant that every day of it was another day for the forensic accountant to work. I drove home from Catherine's office and made dinner and watched something on television that I cannot remember and thought about nothing except the 11 years I had spent in that company and the surgery scar on my back and the look on my father's face when he had said, "Give this a fair chance." And I decided that I would give it a fair chance. I would give everything exactly the chance it deserved. I called Linda Bro that evening. I told her to pull nothing further for now, that I had engaged outside counsel and that outside counsel would be directing the next steps in the review. I told her she was not to discuss any of this with anyone in the building, including and especially the HR coordinator. Linda said she understood. She paused, and then she said something I did not expect. "Renata, for what it's worth, I have been with this company for 11 years. I am not going anywhere." I thanked her. I meant it. The forensic accountant Catherine brought in was a man named Vincent Acaffer, and he operated with the combination of precision and opacity that I have come to associate with people who are very good at finding things that other people have tried to hide. He was thorough in a way that was almost unsettling. He asked for records I had not thought to look at, traced transactions through pathways I did not know existed, and delivered his preliminary findings at week 5 instead of week 6, which told me the picture had been clearer than expected. I met with Vincent and Catherine in Catherine's conference room on a Wednesday morning in late June. Vincent spread his preliminary report across the table in organized sections, and he walked me through it in the calm, methodical way of someone who has learned to give bad news without inflection. The shell vendor scheme I had already identified was the most visible layer, but not the largest. Between the 12 vendor entities, which Vincent had now traced comprehensively, a total of $211,000 had been diverted over 14 months. Not 10 weeks, 14 months. The scheme had begun in January of 2021, 2 months before my father's stroke, which meant it had not started as an opportunistic reaction to his health situation. It had started earlier. It had grown larger when the opportunity presented itself. Below the vendor layer was something more intricate. A series of reimbursement claims, travel, client entertainment, equipment procurement, totaling approximately $108,000, many of which Vincent had cross-referenced against company credit card statements and found to have no corresponding charges. Fabricated receipts, in other words, some executed at a professional enough level that they had passed standard accounting review. Others less careful, filed during the period of my leave when oversight was thinner. Below that was a third layer that I had not anticipated at all. Our operational contingency account, the one I had seen drawn down by $63,000 during my leave, turned out to have been drawn down multiple times over the prior year, replenished each time from operations before the quarterly reconciliation and drawn down again. A revolving pattern. The net position by the time Vincent had traced the full cycle was a shortfall of approximately $148,000 that had cycled through and out of that account over 14 months. $211,000 in vendor fraud, $108,000 in fabricated reimbursements, $148,000 in contingency account cycling, $467,000 approximately, subject to further review. I sat with that number for a long time in that conference room. Vincent was quiet. Catherine was quiet. "Is this a preliminary figure or a ceiling?" I asked. "Preliminary," Vincent said. There are transaction categories I have not fully reviewed yet. It is possible the final number is higher. It was higher. By the time the full forensic audit was complete, the number was $567,000. I want to tell you what that number meant to me, not in terms of money, because money can be recovered. Money is a number on a page. What it meant to me was 14 months of systematic, deliberate theft from a company that my father had built with his body and his time and his entire working life. A company I had given 8 years to. A company that employed 43 people who showed up every morning and did their jobs and trusted that the people running the finances were not quietly looting the foundation. I thought about Linda Bro, who had worked there for 11 years and was about to be pushed out to make room for the man running the scheme. I thought about Quay Massant, who had put that contract on my desk without a word because he understood exactly what he was handing me. I thought about my father in his house in Ellicott City, trying to rest like his doctor told him, trusting that his daughters were taking care of what he had built. I did not cry in that conference room. I did not cry that night. I sat with the number and I thought, all right, now I know the shape of it. Now I know what I am dealing with. Catherine looked at me across the table and said, I want to talk about next steps. I want to talk about them too, I said. But first I want to know, at this level of documented misappropriation, what are we looking at legally? Catherine and Vincent exchanged a brief look. Felony theft charges, Catherine said. Likely wire fraud given the electronic transfers. Potentially embezzlement at the corporate level, which in Maryland carries significant criminal exposure. Civil recovery for the full amount plus potentially damages, and depending on how the CFO appointment was being orchestrated, possibly securities fraud exposure if any of the financial misrepresentations crossed into investor-facing documents. Sergio, not Daniela. Both, Catherine said. She said it gently, which made it land harder. I had known it was both. I had known it since the document properties screenshot showing Daniela had authored the CFO proposal. I had known it in the way you know things you are not ready to say out loud. She is my sister, I said. I know, that doesn't change what the documentation shows. No, Catherine said, it doesn't. I looked out the window of the conference room. It was a gray day, the kind of gray that sits on Baltimore like a low ceiling in late June before the heat breaks. I thought about Daniela's arms around my shoulders in that parking lot. I just rest, I have this. What is my best path forward? I asked. You have two options. Catherine put her hands on the table. Option 1, you take this to the board immediately with the forensic report as the basis. The board triggers its fiduciary obligations, the company pursues civil recovery, law enforcement is notified. This is fast, clean, and maximally damaging to both Daniela and Sergio. The downside is that you lose control of the timeline, and your father will be in the middle of it before you have had a chance to prepare him. And option 2, you continue building the record for another 60 to 90 days, completing the full forensic audit, securing additional documentation, and then you present at a board meeting of your choosing with the complete picture. You get to control the stage. You get to prepare your father privately before the formal board action. And you have the full amount documented, not the preliminary figure. I already knew which option I would choose. Option 2, I thought so. She allowed herself a small, satisfied expression. Then let me tell you what the next 90 days look like. What the next 90 days looked like was the quietest, most controlled, most methodical period of my adult life. From the outside, I was the same Renata Carvalhomes who came to work, ran operations, attended meetings, managed carrier relationships, and participated in the ongoing CFO evaluation process with every appearance of professional due diligence. I was courteous to Sergio in the hallways. I attended Daniela's client dinners. I sat at board tables and asked procedure-based questions about the evaluation timeline and said things like, I just want to make sure we're being thorough. Inside, I was running a parallel operation with the precision of someone who understands that you only get one shot at this. Vincent continued the full forensic audit, expanding his scope to cover the 2 additional transaction categories that had not been fully reviewed in the preliminary report. Each week, he sent Catherine an update. Each week, Catherine forwarded me the key figures. The number grew from 467,000 to 492,000 to 531,000, and finally, in the 3rd week of September, to $567,000 and change. $567,000 in 14 months through 3 distinct financial channels, with documentary evidence for every single transaction. Meanwhile, I was managing the CFO evaluation process from inside it. I had requested, as a board member, that the process include an external candidate search to ensure competitive rigor. The executive search firm we retained moved at the pace of all executive search firms, which is to say slowly and with great bureaucratic dignity. I had also requested that Sergio's application include a full reference verification, standard for any C-suite role, which required his prior employers to be contacted directly. His prior employers, it turned out, had some complicated feelings about Sergio Vidal, which the search firm's background process began to surface in mid-August in a way that put a natural hold on the timeline. I did not cause those complications. I simply made sure the process was thorough enough to find them. During this period, I also had 3 conversations that mattered. The first was with Harold Osai, one of our outside board members. Harold was 67 years old, a former VP at a regional food distribution company, and a man whose primary orientation was toward protecting the institution rather than any individual within it. He was not close to my family. He was not close to Daniela. He was close to the idea of Carvalho Distribution as a functioning company. I had always liked that about him. I called Harold in late July and asked if we could have coffee off the record. He agreed without pressing me on the reason, which told me he already had a sense that something was moving. We met at a diner in Annapolis on a Saturday morning, and I told him not everything, not yet, but the outline. I told him that I had concerns about the financial integrity of the company that I was in the process of documenting thoroughly, and that I expected to bring those concerns formally to the board within the next 60 days, and that I wanted him to be prepared for what that conversation would look like. Harold set his coffee cup down with a deliberate precision and looked at me for a long moment. "How serious?" he asked. "Serious enough that the company's attorney will need to be present when I present." He absorbed that. "Does your father know?" "Not yet." "I intend to speak to him privately before the board meeting." Harold nodded slowly. "When you're ready to present, I'll be there, and Renata." He looked directly at me. "Document everything, every step you took, every professional you engaged, make the process airtight." That's exactly what I've been doing. The second important conversation was with Priya Nambudiri, the other outside board member, who had voted against the CFO proposal back in May, and who had in the months since been asking increasingly pointed questions in board meetings about the evaluation timeline. Priya was a financial consultant by profession. She understood exactly what a thorough reference check was supposed to surface, and she was patient in the way of someone who knows the answer is coming, just waiting for the room to catch up. I did not tell Priya as much as I had told Harold, but I told her enough. I told her I was preparing a formal financial review and that I would be bringing it to the board with full documentation. Priya said, without missing a beat, "Good. I'll want to review the materials before the meeting if possible." I told her that could be arranged. The third conversation was the hardest, and I have thought about it more than any of the others. I called my father on a Sunday afternoon in late September, about 3 weeks before I intended to call the board meeting. I drove to his house in Ellicott City. I did not want to have this conversation over the phone, and I sat with him in the kitchen where he had made coffee the same way for my entire life, with a stovetop pot and no timer, just instinct. I did not tell him the full amount. I told him I had discovered financial irregularities during my review of the company's accounts, that I had engaged outside counsel and a forensic accountant, and that the findings were significant. I told him I was going to bring it to the board within the month. I told him I was sorry to be the person sitting at his kitchen table telling him this. My father was quiet for a long time. He looked out the window at his backyard, where he had a garden that he kept with the same methodical attention he had given everything in his life. His hands were around his coffee cup. "How significant?" he asked. I told him the number. His hands tightened on the cup, that was all. His hands tightened and then he released them slowly, one finger at a time. "Daniela," he said. It was not a question. "Daniela and Sergio," I said, "together." He did not say anything for a while. "Then you're sure?" "Completely. The forensic audit covers every transaction." Vincent Acaffer prepared it. Catherine Stone retained him. Everything is documented and independently verified. My father looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before, or maybe I had seen it once in the hospital 3 days after his stroke, when he had looked at me from a bed with monitors attached and said, "I don't want to lose what I built." The same expression, the same thing underneath it. "You should have told me sooner," he said. "I couldn't tell you anything until I was certain, absolutely certain. You would have confronted Daniela and we would have lost the evidence." He thought about that. "You're right," he exhaled slowly. "You're right, of course." A pause. "Does she know you know?" "No." "Does the attorney know?" "Farrell?" "Not yet. Catherine Stone has been handling everything. Thomas will need to be in the room for the board meeting." My father put his coffee cup down on the table with a gentle, final sound. He looked at his garden for another long moment. "I built that company to give you and your sister something solid," he said. "Something that would last." "I know. I never thought." He stopped. "I know," I said again. "Dad," I put my hand over his on the table. "What she built, what we are going to show the board, that is not who you are. It is not what you built. The company is solid. The people in it are solid. And when this is over, the company will still be there." He looked at me. His eyes were red at the corners. "My father would have said there is no shame in being robbed," I told him. "There is only shame in letting the thief stay." He covered my hand with his other hand. We sat like that for a little while. That was the only moment in those 90 days when I let myself feel it, all of it, the grief and the fury and the weight of what I was carrying and what I was about to do. I sat at my father's kitchen table and I held his hand and I let myself feel it fully for about 4 minutes. Then I folded it away and I drove back to Baltimore and I called Catherine Stone. I'm ready to call the board meeting, I said. Good. I heard her sit forward in her chair. Let's talk about how we want to run it. The board meeting was scheduled for the third Tuesday of October 2022. I sent the formal notice to all board members the required 7 days in advance with the agenda item listed simply as Financial Review COO Presentation. I gave no preview of the content to Daniela or Sergio. I told Thomas Farrell the day before the meeting that he needed to be there and that the agenda item was going to require his attention. He asked what kind of attention. I said the kind that involves reading a forensic audit. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'll be there. I spent the weekend before the meeting at Catherine's office reviewing the presentation materials one final time. The deck was 47 slides. It covered every transaction category, every shell vendor, every fabricated reimbursement, the full contingency account cycle, the timeline from January 2021 through the present, and the total verified figure of $567,000 in misappropriated company funds. Vincent Acaffer had signed the forensic report. Catherine had reviewed every document for legal soundness. Harold Osa had been sent a preview copy 48 hours in advance. I had agreed to this when we met for coffee in Annapolis, and it meant that when I walked into the boardroom, there would be at least one other face in the room that already knew the shape of what was coming. I rehearsed my opening lines once on Sunday evening. Then I put the laptop in my bag, got 8 hours of sleep because I had learned years ago that preparation is wasted on an exhausted body, and drove to the office on Tuesday morning at 8:15. The boardroom was on the third floor. It had glass walls on 2 sides and a long table that sat 12, though we were only ever 8 or 9. The chairs were the expensive kind, the ones with the slight give when you sit, the ones someone chose deliberately to signal that this was a serious room for serious decisions. I arrived before anyone else. I set up my laptop at the head of the table. I connected to the projection system, opened the forensic audit file, and positioned it minimized behind my desktop, ready. Quaim brought me coffee. He set it down without a word. Then he straightened the notepad next to my laptop, went to the door, and said quietly, without looking directly at me, "You've got this." I looked at him. He was 26 years old and had worked for me for 3 years and had put a contract on my desk one morning in April without a single word because he knew I needed to see it. "Thank you, Quaim," I said, "for everything." He nodded once and left. Priya Nambudiri arrived next, with her reading glasses already on. She gave me a brief, direct look, sat 2 seats to my right, and opened her own notebook. Harold Osa arrived 2 minutes later, hung his coat on the rack by the door, and took his seat with the gravity of a man preparing for something unpleasant that is nevertheless necessary. Thomas Farrell arrived with his briefcase and the careful expression of an attorney who has been told to be present without being told why. My father arrived last of the non-principals, moving carefully as he always did now, and sat at the far end of the table rather than his usual chairman position. He looked at me once and gave a small nod. Daniela and Sergio arrived together, which they had started doing openly in the past 2 months, a statement I had always thought of how comfortable they had become. Daniela had her usual portfolio, her usual warmth, the particular brightness that entered a room with her. Sergio was in a navy suit. He had the look of a man who expected to be announced something good. I waited until everyone was seated. I waited until the side conversations wound down. I let the room settle into the particular Tuesday morning quality of a board meeting that people expected to be routine. Then I opened my laptop and said, "Before we vote on anything, I want to show everyone something." And I pressed play on the forensic audit file and the room stopped breathing. Daniela's hand went to her phone on the table, and she turned it face down without looking at it, a gesture so automatic it told me she had been waiting for something, even if she had not known it would be today. Sergio looked at the screen and then at me, and something shifted in his posture, a subtle forward lean followed by a deliberate settling back, the physical language of a person deciding not to show what they just felt. Harold Osa folded his hands on the table and looked at the projection with the expression of a man who already knew what he was looking at. Thomas Farrell stopped writing on his notepad, just stopped mid-sentence and did not pick the pen back up. I had waited 14 months for this morning. I had rebuilt myself out of a surgery recovery and built a case while pretending I was not building one, and sat through board meetings and family dinners and parking lot hugs and said nothing, nothing, nothing. I had done it right, I had done it completely, and I was ready. If you're still with me, stay, because what happened in that boardroom is the reason I am telling you this story, and there are people in it who owe a great deal to the fact that I chose procedure over fury. The next time I tell this story, I am going to walk you through every minute of that meeting, every document, every face, and every consequence. Because here is the thing about patience: when you have used it as a weapon, the moment you deploy it, everything that held quiet comes out at once. I had waited 14 months. Every day of those 14 months had been a day that Daniela and Sergio had spent becoming more comfortable, more entitled, more convinced that the architecture they had built was invisible and solid and safe. They were wrong on every count. And in that boardroom on that Tuesday morning in October of 2022, I was finally completely ready to show them exactly how wrong. The week before the board meeting, Daniela called me on a Thursday evening. It was 7:40 in the evening, and I was sitting at my kitchen table with a glass of water and the final version of the forensic audit open on my laptop, reading through it one last time the way you read something you have already memorized, just to make sure nothing has changed. I looked at her name on my phone screen for 2 full rings, then I answered. Hey, her voice was light, easy, the voice she used when she was not worried about anything. Are you busy? Just finishing some work. What's up? I wanted to talk before Tuesday about the board meeting. A pause. I know we have not been totally in sync lately, Renata. I know you have some concerns about the CFO process. I just wanted to see if we could get ahead of any tension. I pulled the laptop slightly closer. I appreciate that, I said. What did you have in mind? Coffee tomorrow, just us, like we used to. I let a beat pass, not too long, just enough to seem like I was considering it genuinely. I can do 10 o'clock, I said. The place on Charles Street. Perfect. She sounded relieved, genuinely relieved, which told me she had been more anxious about Tuesday than she was letting on. Not anxious enough, but anxious. I will see you then. I hung up and looked at the forensic audit on my screen. $567,000 documented across 47 slides. I thought about what Daniela expected to accomplish over coffee on Charles Street on a Friday morning. I thought about what she might offer me, what shape the conversation would take, whether she was going to try to get ahead of something she suspected I knew, or whether she genuinely believed she was managing ordinary family friction. Then I thought about what Catherine Stone had said to me 2 weeks earlier when I had told her about the board meeting date. If she reaches out before Tuesday, Catherine had said, let her talk, do not give her anything, do not confirm or deny that you have anything. Just let her lay out what she wants. And if she offers something, Catherine had smiled in the particular way of someone who has been doing this for 25 years. Let her offer it. The more she says, the more you have. I opened a new note on my phone and wrote, Friday, 10 a.m., Charles Street, and then I went to bed and slept better than I had any right to. The coffee meeting was a study in Daniela at her most polished. She arrived 2 minutes before me. She always did. It was her way of controlling the opening, and she had already ordered for both of us, which was either a warmth gesture or a dominance one, probably both. She was wearing a gray blazer and her hair was down, and she looked like herself, which was the hardest part. She always looked like my sister. She started with family things, how our father was doing, whether I had spoken to our cousin in Brazil who was getting married in the spring. I let her run the opening for about 6 minutes, and I watched her the whole time, and I thought about the first time we had sat across from each other at a coffee table, back when we were teenagers and our mother had made us talk through some argument neither of us could now remember. Then she got to it. I know you voted against Sergio's evaluation, she said. Her voice was still easy, but she had straightened slightly. And I know you have had questions about the process. I've had procedural questions, I said. That's my job as a board member, of course. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. But I want to be honest with you because you're my sister and I don't want Tuesday to be hard. Sergio is good for this company. He has been doing work behind the scenes that Linda honestly just does not have the bandwidth for. He has been identifying efficiencies. What kind of efficiencies? A fraction of a pause. Vendor consolidation, payment process improvements. He found some redundancies in our accounts payable structure that we are going to address. I let her see me absorb this thoughtfully. I nodded slowly, as though the words vendor consolidation were interesting to me and not a specific documented source of $567,000 in fraudulent transfers. That sounds meaningful, I said. She leaned forward slightly. Renata, I know you feel like I went around you on some of this. And maybe I moved faster than I should have while you were recovering. I own that, but I want you to come into Tuesday with an open mind, for Dad's sake, if nothing else. He's excited about Sergio's potential, and the last thing he needs is a contentious board meeting that stresses him out. There it was, the architecture of the ask, own a minor procedural misstep, invoke our father's health as a shield, and frame anything I might do on Tuesday as an act of cruelty toward a recovering man. I let my expression soften, let something that looked like reluctance work its way across my face. I hear you, I said. I do care about Dad's stress, you know that. Daniela relaxed visibly, a small release of tension across her shoulders, a softening around her mouth. So you'll come in with an open mind. I'll come in with the same mind I always bring to a board meeting, I said, which was entirely true and which she interpreted entirely incorrectly. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine for a moment. Thank you, really, she smiled. We are better together, you and me. We always have been. I smiled back. I held her gaze. I thought about 14 months. We really have, I said. That was Friday morning. The board meeting was Tuesday. The false submission, the real one, the formal one, the one I had designed, came on the Monday afternoon before the board meeting, and it came because Daniela made a move I had not predicted in its exact form, though I had prepared for its general shape. At 4:30 on Monday afternoon, Daniela, Sergio, and Thomas Farrell, our company attorney, came to my office. Daniela knocked, which was unusual. I looked up from my desk and I saw the three of them in the doorway, and I understood immediately that something had been arranged. Thomas had his briefcase. Sergio was carrying a manila folder. Daniela looked like a person who has rehearsed an important conversation. "Do you have a few minutes?" Daniela asked. Of course, I gestured to the chairs. "Come in." They arranged themselves across from my desk. Thomas sat to the left, the neutral position of a professional present as a formality. Sergio sat to the right of Daniela, his folder on his knee, his posture the posture of a man who has prepared for a negotiation he expects to win. Daniela sat in the center and crossed her ankles and looked at me with an expression of practiced reasonableness. "We wanted to talk about tomorrow's agenda item before the board meeting," Daniela began. "Specifically, the financial review you've listed." I waited. Sergio took over smoothly, the practiced transition of two people who had coordinated their approach in advance. "Renata, I think we all know there have been some questions about the financial management during your leave of absence. I want to address those directly." He opened the folder and slid a document across my desk. "This is a reconciliation memo I prepared covering the operational account activity from February through April. I want you to have this before tomorrow so that anything that looks irregular has context." I picked up the document. I looked at it. It was 4 pages, professionally formatted, and it explained the vendor payments as part of a new supplier diversification initiative, the reimbursements as client development costs, and the contingency account activity as routine cash management. It was confident, specific, and completely false. I read it slowly. I let my expression show a careful, almost pained attention to the pages. I turned the third page and paused there for several seconds as if something on it required particular consideration. "This is thorough," I said quietly. "I want everything to be transparent," Sergio said, and his voice carried the particular warmth of a man who has decided transparency is the best costume to wear. "I know my role here is new, and I know there have been questions about fit. I am genuinely invested in this company's success, and I think tomorrow's meeting could be a real turning point if we walk in aligned." Daniela picked up the thread. "The board has a lot of respect for you, Renata, you know that, and the outside members have been responsive to the evaluation process. But if you come in tomorrow with adversarial energy, particularly with Dad at the table, it is going to create damage that takes years to repair." She paused. "We are proposing something simpler." She slid a second document across the desk. This one was 2 pages. It was a proposed amendment to the board agenda, a reframing of my financial review item as a routine quarterly update rather than a formal presentation, paired with a pre-approval of Sergio's CFO appointment conditional on a 60-day onboarding period. I looked at the 2-page document. I looked at the reconciliation memo. I looked at Daniela and then at Sergio, and I let something cross my face that looked like a woman calculating what she can afford to lose. "If I agree to this," I said slowly, "what happens to the existing accounting team structure?" "Linda Bro." Sergio glanced at Daniela before answering, which was a tell I filed away without any expression. "Linda transitions to a senior compliance officer role. She retains her compensation. And her reporting line to me," Sergio said. As CFO, I looked at the document again. I picked up a pen. I let my hand be visibly unsteady, not dramatically, just the fine tremor of someone carrying a weight they're about to set down. I let the silence stretch until Daniela shifted very slightly in her chair. "I've spent a long time at this company," I said, and I made my voice quieter than my normal register. "A long time building something I care about." "We all have," Daniela said, softening. "And I want things to be okay. With Dad, with the company, I don't want a war." I let my voice catch just slightly on the word war, not much, just enough. Daniela's expression moved into something that was almost genuine sympathy, which was the saddest thing I observed in that entire 2-year ordeal, that she could still feel something that looked like tenderness for me in the moment she believed she was winning. "Nobody wants a war," she said. I looked down at the document. "I signed it." My hand trembled. I had practiced the tremor, just a light unsteadiness, the kind that reads as emotion rather than performance. I initialed the bottom of the reconciliation memo as received. I handed both documents back across the desk. Sergio took them with the particular care of a man receiving something valuable. He did not quite smile, but his jaw released the way a jaw releases when the tension goes out of it. "Thank you, Renata," Daniela said. "Really, this is the right move." Thomas Farrell had said almost nothing during the entire meeting. He looked at me once as he stood, a lawyer's look, careful, reading, not quite readable, and I held his gaze for just long enough to let him know I was completely aware of what I had just done. What he made of that look, I do not know, but he was silent all the way out the door. I sat in my office for about 4 minutes after they left. I looked at the pen I had used to sign the document. I thought about what I had signed, a reframing memo and a pre-approval document, neither of which had any board force without a formal vote, neither of which superseded the forensic audit sitting in Catherine Stone's briefcase, neither of which changed a single number in Vincent Acaffer's verified report. I had signed a document agreeing to let the agenda item be reframed as a routine update. I had given them exactly what they wanted. I had also, while Sergio was talking about supplier diversification initiatives with great professional confidence, sent Catherine Stone a text message under the desk that said, "They came to my office. I signed the reframing agreement. We are still on for tomorrow. Do not change anything." Her reply came in under 2 minutes. "Good girl. I will be in the lobby at 8. That night I went home. I made dinner. I watched nothing. I sat at my kitchen table in the quiet and I thought about all of it: the surgery, the recovery, the April morning with the stack of contracts, Linda Bro's careful face, my father's hands around his coffee cup, Daniela's arms around my shoulders in the parking lot. I let myself feel the sadness of it one more time, fully, the way you press on a bruise to know how deep it goes. Then I folded it back into the place where I had been keeping it and I went to bed. Tomorrow I would need steady hands and a clear head, and the kind of patience that comes from knowing, with complete certainty, that every single move you are about to make is grounded in fact. They thought they had won. As of 4:45 on Monday afternoon, Sergio Vittel and my sister Daniela believed that Tuesday's board meeting was going to be a quiet, orderly event at which their CFO appointment would be pre-approved, and the uncomfortable woman across the table would sit down and let it happen. In 16 hours, every person in that boardroom was going to understand what I had been doing for 14 months. The morning of the board meeting, I was at the office before 7. Catherine Stone arrived in the lobby at 8 sharp, as promised, in a charcoal blazer and the expression of a woman going to work. She was carrying her briefcase and a second bag that I knew contained the physical backup of the forensic audit, printed, tabbed, individually labeled for each board member present. Vincent Acaffer arrived 5 minutes after her in a dark suit with his own copy of the report and the quiet bearing of a man who has testified at a number of depositions and is not made nervous by rooms full of people who do not want to hear what he has to say. I shook both their hands in the lobby. "Any questions before we go up?" "None," Catherine said. "None," Vincent said. We went up. I had arranged for Quame to distribute the printed forensic audit packets to each board member's seat before the meeting started, with a cover sheet that read only, "Forensic Audit, Carvalho Distribution, prepared by Vincent Acaffer, CPA, CFE, retained by Catherine Stone, Esquire, presented October 22, 2022. No preview, no summary. The full document, waiting at each seat like a verdict that had already been decided. When Daniela and Sergio walked into the boardroom at 8:55 and saw the packets on the table, Sergio stopped moving for exactly 1 second. 1 full second of complete stillness in the doorway with his hand on the door frame. Then he continued to his seat. Daniela picked up the packet at her place and looked at the cover sheet. Then she looked at me. I was already at the head of the table with my laptop open, connected to the projection screen, and I met her eyes without any expression at all. She set the packet down. Her hand did not move from it. My father came in last. He looked at the packet at his seat and then at me, and I gave him the smallest nod, the one we had arranged, the signal we had agreed on when I had sat at his kitchen table 3 weeks earlier and told him the number. He sat down slowly and folded his hands on the table and looked at the cover sheet and looked away. I waited until everyone was seated. I waited until Sergio had opened his folder, the same folder from yesterday afternoon, the reconciliation memo, his prepared answers, and until Daniela had straightened the packet at her place without opening it, and until Harold Osai had put his reading glasses on, and until Priya Nambudiri had opened her notebook. I waited until Thomas Farrell had arrived and taken his seat to the side, and until the room had the quality of a room full of people who believe they know what is about to happen. Then I said, before we vote on anything, I want to show everyone something. And I opened the forensic audit file on my laptop, and the first slide appeared on the projection screen, the cover slide, clean and precise, Forensic Audit, Carvalho Distribution, prepared by Vincent Acaffer, CPA, CFE, finding period, January 2021 through October 2022, total documented misappropriation, $567,000. Nobody spoke. For 4 full seconds, nobody breathed. Daniela's hand, still on the packet in front of her, pressed flat against the cover, her fingers spread wide as though she were trying to hold it shut by force of will. Sergio's chin came up. His eyes moved from the screen to me, to Catherine Stone, to Vincent Acaffer, and I watched him calculate in real time who these people were, what their presence meant, whether there was a path through this. His hand went to his jacket lapel and then moved away without completing whatever gesture it had started. Harold Osai opened the physical packet in front of him and turned directly to page 1 of the findings. He did not look at Daniela or Sergio. He began to read. Priya Nambudiri closed her notebook. She did not need it anymore. Thomas Farrell looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at his briefcase as though reconsidering its contents. "Renata," Daniela said. Her voice came out careful, modulated, the voice of someone who has decided their first task is to lower the temperature in the room. "I think there may be some context that would be helpful here before we get into." "There will be time for context," I said. "Please let me get through the presentation first." Her mouth closed. She looked at Sergio. He was looking at the screen. I advanced to the second slide. The second slide was the timeline, a single horizontal line spanning January of 2021 through October of 2022, with 7 marked points. The points were labeled with dates and amounts, the first being January 2021, the start of the vendor scheme, and the last being October of 2022, the date of the current forensic report. Beneath the timeline, a single sentence. The following evidence covers 3 distinct financial channels through which company funds were misappropriated over a period of 22 months. 22 months, not the 10 weeks I had first suspected. 22 months. I heard Harold Osa draw in a breath through his nose. He turned to the same page in his physical packet. I'm going to walk you through each channel in order, I said, starting with the vendor structure. The third slide was the vendor map. 12 LLCs, their registration dates, their payment receipt dates, and in the right column, clearly labeled, the physical addresses associated with each entity. 2 mailbox rental addresses in Towson, highlighted in red. 1 residential address in Silver Spring, highlighted in red. The name Marta Vittle in a notation below the Silver Spring address with a source citation, Maryland Property Records. Sergio moved, not standing, just a forward shift, the beginning of standing, arrested. He settled back into his chair with the careful deliberateness of a man deciding not to do the thing he just started to do. These 12 vendor entities, I said, keeping my voice at the measured pace of a person presenting quarterly results, received a combined total of $211,000 in payments from Carvalho Distribution's vendor accounts between January of 2021 and September of 2022. 2 of these entities share a single registered address at a mailbox rental service in Towson, Maryland. 1 is registered to a residential address in Silver Spring that Maryland Property Records show is owned by Marta Vittle. I paused. Sergio, is Marta Vittle your mother? The question landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Sergio looked at me for a long moment. His jaw was tight, the muscles working. That is a residential address that was used temporarily for. Is she your mother? I asked again, the same tone, the same pace. A pause, 3 seconds. Yes, he said. But the use of that address, thank you. I advanced to the next slide. Priya Nambudiri made a sound, not quite a word, more the sound of a person whose suspicion has just been confirmed at a scale they had not anticipated. She pressed her pen against her lips. The 4th slide was the reimbursement analysis. 31 entries over the relevant period, each listed with the claim category, the claimed amount, and a 3rd column labeled, corresponding charge found in company card records. 24 of the 31 entries had the word no in that column in red. 24 of the 31 reimbursement claims filed during this period, I said, have no corresponding charge in the company's credit card records. The total value of these unfounded reimbursements is $108,000. The physical receipts submitted with these claims were reviewed by the forensic accountant. His findings are in Section 3 of your packets. Harold Osai was already on Section 3. His finger moved down the page. He stopped at something. He looked up at Sergio, then back down at the page. The receipts are fabricated, I said, not as an accusation, as a fact stated in the same tone as everything else. Daniela made a sound that was almost a laugh, a single, reflexive exhalation, the kind of sound a person makes when they are looking for any exit from a room that has no exits. She looked at the table. Her hand went to her collarbone, not a necklace. She was not wearing one, but the gesture of reaching for one, the muscle memory of a comfort object. Her fingers touched bare skin and stopped. Renata, Thomas Farrell's voice came from the side of the room, careful and professional. I want to note that these are preliminary findings from an independent accountant and that the parties named should have the opportunity to respond to specific claims before any formal. They will have that opportunity, Catherine Stone said from where she was seated along the wall. Her voice was entirely pleasant. The forensic report was completed and signed 2 weeks ago. Counsel has had the opportunity to review. We are presenting findings, not conducting a trial. She paused 1 beat. The legal process for that will be separate. Thomas looked at Catherine. He did not push further. I advanced to the 5th slide, the contingency account cycle. A graph this time, bars showing account balance over 22 months, the pattern of drawdown and replenishment, until the final bar showed the net position, a shortfall of $148,000. The operational contingency account, I said, was designed to be a stable reserve fund, replenished quarterly from operations, with a maximum balance of $120,000. Over 22 months, this account was drawn down and replenished in a pattern consistent with an attempt to conceal recurring withdrawals within normal cash flow variation. The net shortfall, accounting for all cycles, is $148,000. This represents the 3rd channel of misappropriation. I looked at Harold Osai. Harold, can you confirm that the board was never informed of material changes to the contingency account balance? Harold did not hesitate. Not in any board meeting I attended. No, he looked at Daniela. Not once. Daniela opened her mouth, then she closed it, then she opened it again. Dad, her voice shifted registers, less the boardroom voice, more something younger and rower. Dad, let me explain. Let her finish, my father said. His voice was very quiet and very even. He was looking at the projection screen and not at Daniela, and the set of his shoulders was the set of a man who has made a decision about what he's going to do and is simply waiting for the presentation to confirm it. Daniela looked at him. Something moved across her face. I do not have a precise word for it. Not fear exactly and not guilt exactly. Something that looked like the particular grief of a person watching a door close. She turned back to the table. Her chin came up. The warmth went out of her posture and something else came in, something harder and more defensive, and when she spoke again her voice had the compressed quality of a person who has decided that forward is the only direction available. This is a selective reading of complex financial activity, she said. Sergio's role included streamlining vendor relationships and modernizing payment processes. The account activity you are showing reflects an operational strategy, not misappropriation. And I would note, her voice sharpened slightly, that a forensic accountant retained privately by a board member without board authorization is not a neutral source. I let her finish. I waited one beat, then I advanced to slide 6. Slide 6 was the email chain, 27 emails between Daniela's company account and a Gmail address registered to S. Vittle spanning 11 months. The emails were not about vendor diversification. They were not about payment process improvements. They were about amounts, timing, account codes, and in 3 specific instances, about the forensic risk of the approach they were using and how to minimize it. One email, dated August of 2021, contained the line, "The contingency account cycles are the cleanest because they reset before quarterly review. Keep that one going." I did not read the email aloud. I left it on the screen long enough for everyone in the room to read it themselves. Harold Osai put the physical packet down on the table very slowly, the way you put something down when your hands need to be free. He looked at Sergio. "That is your Gmail address." Sergio said nothing. "Is that your Gmail address?" Harold's voice had changed, still controlled, but with the particular weight of a man who sat on boards for reasons that were not ceremonial. "I want to consult with an attorney," Sergio said. His voice was flat. All the warmth of the previous afternoon, all the professional geniality of the man who had spoken about alignment and transparency was gone. What was left underneath was something very plain and very frightened. "That's your right," Catherine Stone said. "This meeting, however, will continue." "I'm going to need to stop this meeting," Thomas Farrell said, standing. "As company counsel, I cannot allow—" "Thomas," my father's voice, not loud, not angry, just utterly certain. "Sit down." Thomas sat down. The room was quiet. The clock on the wall made it sound. Someone, I think it was Harold Osai's associate who had come along to take notes, stopped writing entirely and simply held her pen above the paper. I advanced to slide 7. This one was the CFO proposal document properties screenshot, the file created in Daniela's user profile, the metadata showing creation date and author, paired on the same slide with the email chain's date range. A visual demonstration of the timeline, the vendor scheme running for 11 months, the reimbursement scheme running parallel, and at month 14, the creation of the CFO proposal that would put Sergio in formal signature authority over the financial accounts he had been looting. The Chief Financial Officer proposal presented to this board in May of 2022, I said, was authored by Daniela Carvalho Mays in her company account and presented as a governance initiative. The timing of that proposal falls at a point in the documented misappropriation timeline when the contingency account exposure was approaching its maximum cycle risk, the point at which formal CFO authority would have provided the greatest opportunity to formalize and conceal the financial structure already in operation. Daniela stood up. Not explosively, she stood the way a person stands when they need height, when sitting has become untenable. She put both hands on the table and looked at me across the length of it with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not anger and not grief and not the polished warmth of the woman who had handed me coffee on Charles Street. Something stripped, something that was just her, underneath all of it. "You have been building this for how long?" Her voice was low, almost wondering. 14 months, I said. A sound from somewhere at the table, Priya Nambudiri, I thought, a single sharp exhalation that landed somewhere between admiration and shock. 14 months, Daniela said it again, as though repeating it might change what it meant. "From the week I came back from surgery," I said. "From the morning Quaim put a contract on my desk." Daniela looked at Quaim's empty chair by the door, as if she had forgotten he existed, as if the fact of his quiet attention for all those months was only now resolving into shape. "I trusted you," she said. Something moved through me, not anger, but something older and heavier. I kept my voice level because I had promised myself that in this room I would not give her anything that was not a fact. "You took $567,000 from our father's company," I said. "While he was recovering from a stroke, while I was recovering from surgery, through shell vendors, fabricated receipts, and a financial structure designed to be invisible." Daniela's hands were still on the table. The color had been draining from her face in stages since the first slide, and now she looked like a person standing at the end of something she had built and watching it understand its own weight. I was going to pay it back, she said. The silence after those words was the longest silence of the entire morning. It stretched across the room and touched every person in it. Harold Osei took his reading glasses off and set them on the table. Priya Nambudiri looked at the wall. My father looked at his hands. Sergio, who had not spoken since invoking his right to counsel, looked at his folder as though he were reading it, though he had not turned a page in 20 minutes. Thomas Farrell, to his credit, did not try to speak. I want to pay it back, Daniela said, quieter. Her voice had lost its architecture. Renata, the time for that conversation is not in this room, Catherine Stone said, not unkindly. What happens in this room is a board action. What happens after is a separate matter. Daniela looked at Catherine. Then she sat back down. She did not touch the packet in front of her again. I advanced to the final summary slide. The 3 channels, the total, the documentation sources, the scope of the forensic engagement, and a single section at the bottom labeled Recommended Board Actions. It listed 4 items: immediate suspension of Sergio Vidal's consulting contract and all system access, referral of the forensic findings to the company's insurance carrier, formal notification to counsel regarding civil recovery options, and notification to the relevant authorities as required by the board's fiduciary obligation. That last item, notification to the relevant authorities. Harold Osei read it. He looked at me. You understand what that means, he said. It was not a question. I do, I said. I thought about it for a long time. Harold looked at Priya Nambudiri. Priya looked at Harold. Something passed between them in the way things pass between people who have been on boards together long enough to have a shorthand. I'll move the first recommendation, Harold said. Immediate suspension of consulting contract and access revocation. Second, Priya said. The vote was 4-0. My father voted in favor. He kept his eyes on the table. Daniela did not vote. She sat with her hands in her lap. Second recommendation, Harold said. Insurance carrier referral. Seconded, Priya said. 4-0 again. Third recommendation, Civil Recovery Council. 4-0. When Harold reached the fourth recommendation, he looked at my father first. My father looked up. Their eyes held for a moment. Harold Osei, the retired executive with no stake in this family's grief, and Eduardo Carvalho, who had built everything in this room out of a warehouse with 2 forklifts and a van. My father looked at the table. Then he looked up again. Moved, he said. Priya seconded. 4-0. The 4 votes took less than 8 minutes. By the time the last one passed, Sergio Vidal had been escorted by Harold's associate to the IT coordinator's office to have his access credentials revoked in real time. He did not protest. He walked out of the boardroom with the careful, reduced quality of a man who has understood all at once that the architecture he was standing in has collapsed. Daniela sat through all of it. She did not leave with Sergio. She sat at the boardroom table while the votes were taken, while Thomas Farrell made careful notes in his legal pad, while Catherine Stone collected her materials with the satisfied efficiency of a woman whose case is complete. Daniela sat with her hands folded and her face very still, and she watched the morning end. When the formal agenda items were concluded and people began to gather their things, I did not look at her right away. I closed my laptop and removed the USB drive and put both in my bag. I thanked Harold Osei, who shook my hand and held it for a moment and said, "Well done." I thanked Priya Nambudiri, who said only this was the right thing, in the direct way she said all things. I thanked Vincent Akafer, who nodded once with the quiet satisfaction of a man whose work has served its purpose. Then I walked to the end of the table where my father was still sitting. He looked up at me. Eyes were red at the corners, the same way they had been at his kitchen table 3 weeks earlier. He did not speak. He held out his hand and I took it, and we stood like that for a moment in the emptying room, the 2 of us, the way we had stood at the end of a lot of things over the years. The company is solid, I told him again, the same thing I had said in his kitchen. I know, he said, because of you. I did not cry in that boardroom. I had not cried anywhere since the beginning of this. But standing at the end of that long table with my father's hand in mine, I came closer than I had in 14 months. Daniela was still at her seat when I finally turned toward her. The room was largely empty by then, just the 2 of us and the scatter of printed forensic audit packets and the projection screen still lit with the summary slide. She looked at me for a long time. Her face was very tired. I don't know what I expected, she finally said. I thought about that. I think you expected that you would always be the one people believed, I said, not cruelly, just as a fact. I think you expected that I would not be willing to do what it took. She looked at the table. You were willing. Yes, she gathered her things slowly. She stood up. At the door, she stopped without turning around. I'm sorry, she said. I know that's not enough. I did not answer. She did not wait for one. The door closed behind her with a soft, ordinary sound. The civil case was filed in November of 2022. The Maryland Attorney General's office opened a criminal investigation in January of 2023, based on the referral from the Carvalho Distribution Board and the forensic audit submitted as supporting documentation. By March, Sergio Vidal had been charged with felony theft, wire fraud, and embezzlement, 3 counts each. His attorney entered not guilty pleas on his behalf. The charges did not require that position to last very long. By late spring, with the weight of 22 months of email evidence and a forensic audit prepared by a certified fraud examiner, the plea negotiations concluded. Sergio Vidal pled guilty to 2 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of felony theft in June of 2023. He was sentenced in September. The sentence was 4 years in a Maryland correctional facility, with the court ordering full restitution of $567,000. Daniela was charged separately in February of 2023, conspiracy to commit wire fraud and 1 count of embezzlement. Her attorney negotiated extensively. The final resolution was a guilty plea to 1 felony count, with a sentence of 2 years of supervised probation, a $200,000 restitution judgment, and the permanent surrender of her ownership stake in Carvalho Distribution as part of the civil settlement. She did not serve prison time. I was told this was partly a product of her cooperation with the criminal investigation into Sergio, and partly the kind of outcome that happens when a family does not request the maximum outcome for one of its own. My father did not request it. I did not either. There are things you can do and things you find when it comes down to it that you cannot. She moved to Philadelphia in the spring of 2023. I do not know her daily life there. I know she is working. I know she and Sergio separated before his sentencing, which I imagine had been coming for some time. I have not spoken to her since the boardroom. Linda Bro is still at Carvalho Distribution. Her title is now Chief Financial Officer, a title she has held since November of 2022, when the board voted to appoint her officially. She got the title with a compensation adjustment that reflected 11 years of carrying a company's financial integrity with no recognition. She has not thanked me for it because she is not a person who performs gratitude. Instead, one morning about a month after her appointment, she put a very thorough financial controls audit on my desk, something she had apparently been preparing for years, waiting for the right moment, and said, "I think we should implement these before the end of the fiscal year." We did, every single one. Quay was promoted to Director of Operations Support in early 2023. He is 29 now and runs a team of 4, and is exactly as perceptive as he was when he put a contract on my desk and said nothing. My father retired from any operational role in the spring of 2023, which is what his cardiologist had been asking him to do for 2 years. He remains chairman emeritus on paper, and occasionally he calls me to ask about specific vendor relationships or carrier negotiations, and I tell him what he wants to know, and he tells me I am doing it right, and we have dinner at his house in Ellicott City more often than we used to. I am Chief Executive Officer of Carvalho Distribution now. I have been since January of 2023, when the board voted to restructure the executive leadership following everything that had happened. The company closed the prior fiscal year at $5.8 million in revenue, a number that would have surprised my father when he started, and which is not our ceiling. There are 47 employees in that building now. Their paychecks clear every 2 weeks. The accounts are clean, and the vendors are real, and the financial controls are the tightest they have ever been. I live in a different apartment than I did during the 14 months I spent building my case. I moved last summer to a place in Fells Point with a kitchen I actually cook in and windows that face the water. I run 3 mornings a week along the harbor past the same docks in the early light before most of the city is awake. Some mornings I think about those 14 months and what they cost and what they made. Most mornings I just run. I am not a person who learned to trust herself through hardship. I was already a person who trusted herself. What those 14 months taught me was something smaller and more specific, that the people who dismiss you are almost always dismissing information they cannot afford to look at, and that the most powerful thing you can do sometimes is let them keep dismissing you until you are ready. My name is Renata Carvalho Mays. I was underestimated by someone I loved for most of my professional life. I kept the company my father built. I kept the jobs of 47 people. I kept my own name intact, which turned out to matter more than anything else. If someone is counting on your silence, stop giving it to them. Hit that like button, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and drop the word Renata in the comments if you're done being the person in the room that everyone forgot to watch.